The image at hand that's being used for this assignment is The Falling Man by Richard Drew, which was taken in 2001 when Drew was covering 9/11 for the Associated Press. Many people believe that this image should not have been published due to the graphic nature of it, even though when Drew took the picture, he believed that the photo really seemed as peaceful in an otherwise very, very messy and controversial day. When looking at ethics and deciding on whether or not to print a photograph in a publication, many people use the Bach model of photojournalism, which is whenever we take a step back and look at a photo and look at it in three different ways. One being how we would want to be treated if we were in this situation and what we would think if we opened newspaper and saw this photo that directly pertained to us. The second being, whenever you look at these photographs and the use of them, we look at what the audience expects to see. Third being is what decision would we make and what ethical decisions do we have to make when coming up with the decision of yes, we print a specific image or no, we don't. So rule number 1 of the Bach model is to take a step back and think about how you would feel if this image directly impacted you. I know if I personally woke up on the morning after 9/11 and saw this image printed in a publication, I would most definitely be taken aback because it's not something that I would have expected. If I had indeed lost a loved one in 9/11, I would be very shooken up and obviously would have a very hard time wrapping my head around why these events happened and why so many innocent lives were lost. Which is why I think seeing this image, potentially on the front page of a newspaper, would be so shocking. Though I would never want to be directly impacted and see this photograph of somebody that could have been my loved one, I think the reasoning behind this photograph being okay is because the image, though you can make out what it is, you can't define the exact person in the image. The image of the falling man obviously captures a man taking his own life and jumping from one story of the World Trade Center after it had been attacked. But this man wasn't the only one who did this on the day of this event. Due to the lack of detail in the picture, and obviously not being able to make out whether or not this person would or would not be your loved one, is the main reason that I believe that it would be okay to publish a photo like this based on the Bach model's first step.
If I were to take a step back and observe this image personally as if it affected me directly or as if I was the photographer, I would have to say that I agree with Jenna that this is okay to be published in a magazine due to the subject matter being it's no one specific. You can't make out who it is. Um, and I think this image is really interesting because it provokes a lot of thought and a lot of feelings, and most of them probably are negative from the tragedy of the day. But if you really sit there and observe and think about it, there's a positive light to be shed on this, such as what what was the man thinking on the way down? Was he at peace? Was he thinking of a loved one or a favorite memory? And I'm sure at that point he cherished life the most.
The second step of the Bach model has us look at things subjectively from the viewpoint of any person that may or may not open a publication. So for this image, we look at the general public and how they may or may not be affected by seeing such an image and taking a step back and evaluating what their expectations may be whenever potentially opening a print publication the day after 9/11, as is the case in this situation. I think the reason that this image is so controversial and so talked about is not only the stark contrast between the building and the man jumping from the window, but because it was unexpected after all of the events that had happened on 9/11. I believe most people would have anticipated seeing pictures of the burning buildings after planes had crashed into them, and that's why I think that this image is so strong and was so hard-hitting because Richard Drew, who photographed this image of the falling man, took a different perspective of the events that happened that day. So not only did planes crash into these buildings and hundreds and thousands of people were hurt in these attacks, he also looks at the other side of people who really were at a last resort and didn't have many options if they weren't immediately impacted by the plane and the attacks. Because of these reasons and looking ethically at this photograph in step one, when we can't make out the person completely because it's a shot from so far away, I believe that publications would and should be able to use this image, even though it's hard hitting, unanticipated, and in a way very graphic and makes your stomach drop whenever you look at it.
When thinking about how the audience is going to react to this photo as if it were published the day after 9/11, I think overall they would be shocked because they would just see an image of a man capturing his own life on top of all the tragedies that have already happened.
The third step of the Bach model has us take a step back and understand and analyze what type of publication is going to use an image like this. Because 9/11 is an event that affected our country nationally, I believe that images like this would obviously be seen at the national level, so in publications like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but I believe that it would also make an impact in smaller communities, whether that's regionally, maybe not necessarily locally, but it could be seen locally in some cases if you were in New York City or surrounding New York City and you don't have access to or you don't utilize the New York Times or print publications such as the Wall Street Journal.
I imagine that this photo was on the front page of several newspapers all around the world because it makes people think, wow, what was happening that was so terrible that this man needs to take his own life? And I'm sure it was seen negatively at first to all the viewers and readers of these articles. But like I said earlier, when you really stop and think about it, just as a photo, it's a beautiful image for all the feelings and emotions it captures, both negative and positive.
So, though the falling man captured by Richard Drew in 2001 when working for the Associated Press and covering 9/11 is a very graphic image and very hard hitting, I believe that it's an image that should have been published, and I'm very, very impressed and enthralled that it was. I think the image was so powerful and so well received by the audience that has seen the photo is because it's an unexpected image. It's not a photograph of the towers being attacked by airplanes. It's not a photograph of the towers falling down. It's not a photograph of the civilians running in panic. It takes an entirely different approach to covering the day and the events that happened on 9/11. And I believe that that's why this photograph is and was as successful as it was when being published, and why even to this day you can look at this photograph and still feel so many emotional ties to it.